Hello everybody and welcome back. This is now part 30 of our Trumpeter 1/200 scale HMS Hood build. In this video I want to concentrate the work around the funnels themselves and the funnel bases, and I'll be fitting the funnel guys, but before I do that I want to make up some representation of the timber stores which were around the funnel bases, which I'll do from various sizes of strip styrene painted up. And I need to do the funnel guys and the timber at the same time because I don't want the fitting of the timber to interfere with the positioning of the funnel guys, which will only go in one place. So I'm going to have to do them at the same time. The other thing that I want to do is to build and fit the 40-foot derricks, which were boat and ammunition handling derricks, which were at the sides of the after funnel here. They'll be entirely built from Pontos etch brass and turn brass parts. I won't be using any Trumpeter plastic on those at all. So they'll be fitted once all the guys are in place. If I've got time after that, I've got 4 of the gangways to do on the shelter deck. So the first thing to do is to get those derricks built up. So we'll get over to the bench and let's see how they go together. Okay, so as usual I've built one of these up just to check out for you how they're going to go together. The Pontos instructions do leave a bit to be desired in terms of understanding how the derrick fits together, particularly around the rig here at the bottom end. But I've worked that out from the anatomy of the ship book, and we'll just come on to that in a moment. But I found it difficult to get this sorted out in one go. Fortunately, the etch brass parts for the various parts of the rig are on the funnel frets, and I have a spare funnel fret because I did the modification, so I've got a spare fret 5. So I had a couple of goes to get this rig sorted out properly, knowing that I've got these spares to go at. And I did need some of them. I got some of the fitment wrong first time around. So hopefully I can pass on a bit of that experience to you so that you don't make the same mistakes yourselves if you do in the Pontos set. The problem in the Pontos instructions is that it's not absolutely clear how this rig here fits at the back and how this element here fits on either. So I made a modification after working out how the derrick itself worked from the anatomy of the ship book. The other thing that I tried to do, which was a mistake, was to solder some of these parts together. And for some reason, and someone will be able to help no doubt that's got more experience than I have in soldering, I found it very difficult to get the solder to adhere to the turn brass here. It was fine sticking to the etch brass, but I couldn't get any decent adherence to the turn brass parts. So there's something technical that I wasn't doing right there that as I said, someone with more experience would understand and be able to point me in the right direction for next time. So I resorted to super glue, which worked absolutely fine with this. It's quite a delicate structure, but once it's on the ship it's not going to be touched again, so it's not under any stress. So the super glues worked absolutely fine, and I'm happy with not being able to solder that. In terms of the rig, we look at page 92 of the anatomy of the ship book, and we can see the 40-foot derrick here. There are only 2 references, which is the actual boom and the derrick post here, 48 and 47, but we can see an indication of the rig, which helps us understand how the thing worked. So the etch brass rig here on the Pontos set equates to this rig here, which goes down and is fixed to the deck behind the derrick post, and the rig here at the bottom went to the funnel post base and then forward to the winch, which is on the deck alongside the derrick. So obviously the winches on the deck and on the funnel base, on the after funnel base here, were used to manhandle the winch. Obviously, if this derrick was lifting something as heavy as boats, it couldn't be. You would need some sort of mechanical winch to do that work for you. So the book here was very useful in helping me determine how the rig goes together, and I'll try and replicate the rigging onto the forward winch here when we fit this to the ship. This part here on the Pontos etched brass actually is longer than this, and it goes from the pulley down towards the deck. I want to use some elastic thread to replicate the last two pieces of the cable here. And the other modification I made was to actually attach this pulley here to a small column, which I just used some plastic rod for, drilled into the side of the derrick post, and so it gives a bit of spacing at the side here for this part of the rigging, and then I can wrap some elastic thread around that and forward to the winch itself. So hopefully that'll enable us to recreate fairly accurately what this derrick did. Now, I did discover a sequence for this which I found helpful, and I did that by trial and error, error being the operative word. So I'll go through the sequence that I found, and hopefully you'll find that useful if you come to do this part of the build yourselves. So here are all the parts laid out, or most of them anyway. I'll just mention something else in a moment. I used all of these except for this little ring here with the attachment on it, and that's because I fitted this little plastic rod here to fit the cable to and the pulley to, so I didn't need this one. And the other part that I modified was this here, where I cut off the cables underneath the pulley, because I'm going to replace those with some elastic thread when I come to rig the derrick itself. So that's that there, where I've cut the bottom off. The way that I went about building this was to try and get it as strong as possible, as quickly as possible, because this pivot here is very, very flimsy. So I wanted to get this upper stay in place to give some sort of support to the boom, because this piece of turned brass is quite heavy in relation to this very small fixing here. So I just wanted to get that triangular assembly in place so that we got some strength into the assembly. But in order to create that triangle, we just have to be mindful that this part here needs to go in, because it won't go in after we've fitted the cap here. And we also need to slide these parts into place before we cement this forward location point here. Otherwise they won't go on, obviously, afterwards. So you just need to think ahead a little bit so you don't lock yourself out. The actual pivot is this part, which folds in half just through 180 degrees. And that actually fits into the end of the boom. There's the tiniest hole at the end of the boom, and it doesn't look as though that's going to fit in, but I was surprised to find when I built this that it did fit fairly easily. I'll just put a bit of thin super glue in there. So that's obviously quite to scale, but it's very, very flimsy. And that attaches to this bracket here on the ring, and it's just got a little fold on it, which we've got to be careful with because there's a tendency for it to want to bend on the actual ring, which is very, very small, or very, very thin and fragile. So that bracket is the first thing that goes on, and obviously it can only go on from the top. And we can slide it down. There's a little turned ring just to stop it sliding down further than where it needs to go. So we'll drop it down to that, and then I'm just going to put a touch of thin super glue on just to tack that into place. That's the bottom bracket, and the boom just slots into the hole there. And you might find that you just got a little burr on the bottom of that, so it just helps if we file the bottom off. Just goes in quite a bit easier if you do it like that. The next thing I want to do is to fit these little brackets here, which are the ones where we've got to get them in the right order. So we put 425 on first, which is the one with the broadest hole. We don't have to glue these yet, they just go over the end of the boom, and that one will slide all the way down. So this is 425. Which doesn't appear to want to go past that little ring. I'm just wondering if it'll go on from the other end. It does. That's interesting. I don't recall having it like that on the first one that I did. Anyway, it's in place. So if you can't get it over the open end, you can just manage to get it past the bracket and up onto the forward part of the boom. So this is 426, which is the second or middle one. So that goes down and stops on the second ring. And this is 427, which should stop on the first ring, which it does. The other thing that's important to get right is the orientation of these little rings. We want one directly underneath because that accommodates the rigging later on. And I'm only going to glue the front one, which is 427, and that'll just give me a little bit of adjustment on the one behind it. So the front one there is fixed, the one behind is still loose. So the upper ring holds this top cable in place, and the lower ring here holds the pulley mechanism underneath. So obviously you want them up and down on the boom. Okay, I want to fix the boom now into its bracket, but before we do that I mustn't forget to fit the bracket here. So just slide that on, and again I'm not going to cement that in place, it can just run freely until I've put the bottom part of the rig in place. I'm going to go ahead and glue the boom. Off camera I'll just give that a squirt of accelerator. The next part of the rig that I want to deal with is the bottom cable. So the two pulleys at the front go on the two brackets there. This middle pulley goes on the bracket that we just slid in from the back, and I position the end pulley here onto a little spigot which I made out of some plastic rod. I want to drill the hole for that now. You could just try and glue the rod onto the turned brass column, but I found it was stronger just to drill a hole, a millimetre hole in the column, just to make absolutely sure. I've made a pilot hole with the 0.5mm bit, and then once that pilot hole's in place I can drill that out to a millimetre, ready for the millimetre diameter rod. So again, just use some thin super glue into the hole that we've just drilled. This is obviously far too long, it needs trimming down. Just square it off, and then that gives something to glue the bottom rig to, but we're not going to do that just yet. The next part to prepare is this one, and you can see we've got these pulleys at the top which need to be folded over onto themselves. And in my case I just want to take the bottom cables off to replace them later on with some elastic thread, and I want to bend these over so that's ready to go on now. So that's just in place, not glued for the moment because I'm not sure which orientation it needs to be in just yet, but we have to fit it because this top cap will prevent us doing it later, so it has to go on now. This plate at the bottom here wraps around the curvature of the pillar, so I just want to put a little curve on it now. It doesn't need to be too much, and then the cap just fixes onto the top, so we can glue that. And I just want to make sure that the top is in line with the boom. So we just have to eyeball that. There we go. So that's the top bracket in place. And if we now put the top rig on, and this hooks onto the bracket on the top of the post, and that just needs a drop of glue just to hold it in place, otherwise you'll find that it falls out again. And we want to get the bottom end just hooked onto the bracket at the front of the boom. And while we've got it, I'll just put some glue on the end, and that should hold everything in place. I'll get the bottom pulleys on now. These are great fun, and I might have to do these off camera because they're pretty difficult to get located all at once. So they're hooked on. I just managed to get them on okay. So before they fall out again, I'll just put a dab of glue on the end. You'll remember this bracket here which we put on and left loose, and that's for this pulley here at in the middle. But before we do that, I just want to fix the bottom end of the rig onto the piece of plastic that we fitted earlier on. And then this forward pulley hooks onto this middle bracket here, which you can just push forward into position and hook it on. Okay, I think that's it. I'll just fix the I'll just fix the top bracket in place now, and I want it as a mirror image to the first one that I built. We can just adjust these pieces of rig later on, but we'll have it something like that. And then the elastic thread will run from this pulley down onto the deck. We'll have some sort of ring fixing on the deck that the rig can attach to. The last thing for these derricks are these very long ladders which go up the aft side, and I'll use these long Tamiya bending pliers to do this. Obviously it gives us the full length of the ladder to fit into the jaws. It doesn't actually tell us in the Pontos instructions where these ladders fit, but I'm just guessing that they go on the back, so that's where we'll put them. These are not going to need a great deal of glue on them, so I've just got some thick super glue on the top attachment point there. I've managed to get a fixing at the top end, and I'll also get one now at the bottom, I hope. Okay, so that's the ladder. It's really just fitted at the bottom and the top. I haven't attached the intermediate attachment points. I don't want to risk getting glue all the way down the post. So there we are, we've got the two 40-foot derricks built up, and they'll go in some etching primer next and painted in the ship's grey, and then we can get them fitted once we've done all the work around the funnel bases with the guys and the timber storage. Right, so we've got the derricks painted. They've had a coat of etching primer and a top coat of the Tamiya lacquer paint, the grey that we've been using. I just want to do a very small amount of detail painting on this, just to pick the cables out on these derricks. And I'll be using some Tamiya lacquer paint, which paints really well with a brush. If it's nicely thinned down with some retarder lacquer thinner, and that's what I'll be doing here. This colour is a rubber black, so it's a dark scale grey really. I'm not certain that these cables were black, and they probably weren't actually, but the rest of the rig on the ship will be using lycra thread, which is black, and I'm not going to be painting that, so I just want the rig to be consistent, so I'll pick this out in that colour. And it's just a case of working along all the cable elements. I'm missing the pulleys out, I want them to remain in the grey of the ship, so we just need to very carefully work along and make sure the whole thing is covered. You don't want any patches of grey on these cables, otherwise it'll look a bit odd and raggy. Otherwise it'll look a bit untidy, so just try and get a nice smooth finish on this. And the lacquer paint is really good for this sort of application. Just run along the top cables now, so these are a twin cable. Just need to be careful not to get paint in between and block the detail up. You want these to appear as separate parts of the rig. And this dark colour will show up against the structure behind, so the funnels are behind these derricks, so this black will show up, I should think, when it's fitted to the model. Just have a look around, make sure everything's covered, and the last thing to do is the cable at the back. This will go down onto the deck. I'll add some elastic thread to the bottom of this particular piece of rig, and I'll stretch that down to an eyelet on the deck itself. And as I said, that will be black thread, so this will match. So there we are, that's all done. Just adds a little bit of interest to the derrick, rather than it just being all in plain grey. So that's ready to fit to the model now. But we have all the funnel guys and the timber store to build before we can fit these, because these derricks stand right in front of the funnels. Okay, so this is the Pontos fret 16 with all the funnel guys on it down in the bottom left. And these are all individual. They're the same port and starboard, but they are all individual along the funnel. So we've got to be careful with them not to get them mixed up, and because of that I'm going to be removing these one by one, painting them and fitting them straight to the ship. The other benefit of doing that is that it reduces the chance of damage. These are very, very fine, these etchings, and if they get bent, they're going to be very difficult to straighten up again, and the effect will be spoiled. You want these to look as though they're under tension, so they want to be perfectly straight, or as straight as you can get them. We're going to be starting with this one, which is the front guy on the forward funnel, and it attaches actually at this end to the bridge on the Admiral's bridge. So that's the first one that we'll be doing. When I cut them off the fret, I'll just leave a little bit of a stub, and that'll just give a bit more of a contact point for the glue to grip onto as it goes into the holes that I've drilled in the funnel. We just need to work through these one by one. It's a slow process, but as I said, I don't want to get them mixed up. So we'll start with this forward one, get it painted. I'm just going to use some etching primer on these. The Halford's grey etching primer is a very close match on a small part like this for the hull grey that we've used. So I'm quite happy just to use it straight from the can, and it dries to a nice finish as well, straight from the aerosol. So we'll be using that etching primer for the final colour. So we'll get this one taken off. The first one is 1101. This one here at the front. So we'll get that cut off and get it painted, and we'll fit the first one to the model. Okay, so I'm ready to fit these funnel guys now. The Pontos foils, if you remember when we fitted them to the funnels, they had the holes for the guy locations open in the brass. But what I should have done at the time is to drill through into the plastic, and I didn't do that. So I've got the tricky job now of drilling through the brass holes and into the plastic, because the guys, I want to make sure that the pins on the guys go well into the side of the funnel. So this is a bit nerve-wracking, but I've got a 0.5 drill bit on this motor drill, and I just want to open up each of the holes. Very, very carefully. Now, another slight difficulty that I hadn't anticipated, it didn't really occur to me at the time, was that for the funnel modifications I used 2 of the Pontos Fret 5 funnel foils, which are designed for the forward funnel. The forward funnel doesn't have any guys on the back, but the after funnel on the hood did have 2 guys, which are positioned here, and of course we don't have any holes, so I've had to go and drill from scratch the holes for the funnel guys on the back of the after funnel here. The smaller funnel foil in the Pontos set does have these holes already drilled in, but obviously I didn't use that. I used the larger of the funnel foils. So it's just a bit more tricky because you haven't got the holes to start with as a guide, but I managed to get those on without doing any damage. So we'll fit the first of the funnel guys, and I'm going to start with the forward funnel here. There are just 3 to fit on the forward funnel. The one at the front here goes down onto the bridge deck here, not just onto the corner. And as I said, we're going to have to do all of these guys individually, so paint them and fit them and then do the next one, just so that we don't get them mixed up. So let's make a start. We'll get this front one fitted. Okay, we'll start with the forward funnel now, putting the guys on. So this is the first one, which is 1101. So it's the very forward guy on the forward funnel, and this attaches actually to the Admiral's Bridge, just in the corner of the Admiral's Bridge. So we just need to put a very small bend on the top where it attaches to the funnel, just to give us the angle down onto the bridge. So I've got some thick super glue on the attachment points to the funnel, nothing on the forward end yet. And we just gently ease it into the holes that we've drilled out. It's in the bottom, and just lift the top on and just gently place it in position. The thing is with these, as I've said, is not to get them bent. It'd be very difficult to straighten out once you've bent these. So just leave that to set up now, and we can move the guy forward so that it reaches the bridge platform once the super glue is set on the funnel. I'll do the center one now. Sorry, I just knocked the camera there. Again, try and come in with one of the attachment points first and keep the other one away, and then just position them in. This one can be located in its final position. It's just straight down onto the funnel base. So that's quite a straightforward one. And I'm not going to attach these bottom ends to the funnel bases. I don't want to get glue everywhere. So they're just resting on the funnel base, and they're fine there as long as they're not going to get disturbed. We just want this nice straight line of the guys as though they're under tension. So just bend the forward one now. We're just going back to that. The glue's set up, and we can just bend it forward at the eyelet, and that'll bring the guy forward to the corner of the Admiral's Bridge. And again, I'm not going to cement this at the Admiral's Bridge. It will just rest on there. So I'll just do the back guy, and then that'll be the forward funnel finished. I've already done the port side here. Then we can move on to the after funnel. So going on to the aft funnel now, and the forward of the guys is this one, which is 1107. And we just have to make a little angle bend on the front connections of these, because it has to come forward and fit on the upper part of the roof here. But as usual, we just want to let it set first, and we can bend it once the glue's gone off. So that's the forward guy on the aft funnel, just bent forward a little bit so it comes to the roof of the structure here. So you just have to be careful with the next two guys, because Pontos in the instructions have got the numbering mixed up. So they have 1106 as the next one in the centre, but it isn't actually. It's 1105 that goes next, and then 1106 further aft. 1104 is the one at the back here. So I'll just go ahead, having noted that, and fit the next 3 guys, and that'll finish the work off on the funnel guys. Okay, so this is the centre one now. This is 1105, not 1106 as stated in the Pontos instructions. The last guy here at the back is a little bit tricky because it has to fit just past the roof here of the disinfector house, and it only just goes, so it's a little bit of a tight fit. So sorry, my hand's going to be in the way here, but I can't do anything about that at the minute. Sometimes these guys fight you a little bit, and they don't want to fit exactly, and what happens in that case is that they'll tend to bend, whereas you want these as straight as possible, because obviously they want to have the appearance of being under tension. So it's worth just adjusting them until they do look straight. And what I had to do with that last one is just cut the pin off the top part of the guy there and just rest it onto the funnel, and that's because the hole that I drilled was just a fraction, probably no more than 1/4 of a millimetre too low, but it was enough to just push the guy out of position. They're all in, and I'm pretty happy with how they've come out. It wasn't a part of the build that I was looking forward to, I have to say, but the accuracy of the Pontos parts made it a lot easier than I imagined it would be. Okay, with the funnel guys all fitted, I can now finish off the timber stores, which are here. So these are nearly done now. Just 1 or 2 more bits and pieces to add to them. But basically all I've done is cut various grades of strip styrene, both flat and round section, so rod. And I just mounted those various pieces onto a wooden block with some double-sided tape, and just airbrushed them in various shades of greys and browns, just to give the impression of different types of wood, and just so that you don't get a uniform effect to the timber store. And then I just randomly arrange them at the funnel base. They don't want to be neatly stacked at all. These strips are all secured with a tiny amount of PVA, and we just have to be very, very careful not to touch the guys. Just on the front of these lumber stores, I've just made up some stanchions, and they're from some scrap railing. So it's a 4-bar railing, and I've just taken off the top 2 rails to leave 2 at the bottom and the stanchions. And they're just representing some sort of structure just to hold the timber in place on top of the funnel bases. It's very difficult to see on photographs how the timber was retained. There are some photographs with some rope lashing on top, and I might try and recreate that as well, but there was also a glimpse, I thought, of some sort of stanchion. These were probably temporary stanchions that could just be inserted when required, but I'm not certain about that. The other thing that I've added in this area are some Denton rafts up on the top of the structure here. So there are 2 at the back on this railing, and I've fitted 4 along the front. We're not exactly certain where the Denton rafts were, but there is some evidence that there were some Denton rafts on the structure at this point. So it's just a case of randomly fitting them. And they're 3D parts, they're not the ones that are supplied in the Pontos set. I think they were far too fiddly when I've already got some 3D parts that just needed painting and fitting. So that's all good. We're just ready now to fit the 40-foot derricks which go here. I've already done the one on the port side. This is thick super glue. This is going to need some support because it's quite a heavy piece of brass, and it has a tendency to want to fall over. So once it's starting to set up, I'll just get some blue tack and just support it at the boom end. So the sign that you're going to be looking for really when you're viewing the model is to make sure that it's parallel with the funnel and obviously vertical from the side as well. So we can fit the gangways now. There are 4 of them on the shelter deck altogether, and what I'm doing here is just painting in the exposed edges of the deck. It's something that I missed out earlier on in the build when I was sorting the shelter deck out, but obviously I need to just touch that in before I come to fit the ladders. So just work around with some of the ship's grey, the Tamiya lacquer paint, and just touch those in ready for the ladders and surrounds to be fitted. It's very difficult at this stage now to find somewhere to rest so that we're not doing any damage as we're doing these sort of tasks. It's got to be constantly aware of where your fingers are. So just work around, paint all these gangway surrounds, and then we'll get the ladders in. Okay, so with all that paintwork done, I can come in now and fit the ladders themselves and the surrounds. These need a very, very small amount of glue. I use a thick super glue. These have already been pre-painted, and I just put a dab here right at the top of the ladder underneath the stanchion, and that just rests on the upper part of the deck. So again, gently in, try and find some support to just drop that in place. There we are, and just leave it. The super glue will set up and that'll be quite firm enough that you don't need to mess about with it. Can do the surround now, and again I just put some super glue on the back face of these, just at the bottom. So just carefully come in and drop the back edge down onto the deck, We can adjust the front end of these where the ladder emerges. Okay, so that's pretty much done for this week. I haven't got round to doing the railings around the forward quads, but we'll have to come back to that another time. I wasn't really looking forward to doing the funnel guys, but in the end they've gone on pretty well. Not too many traumas with them. There's one or two areas where I had to struggle to get them to fit properly, but we managed to do it and it's all done. The 40-foot derricks look good as well. It's a shame that the Pontos instructions weren't quite up to scratch on the derricks, but with a bit of reference material, and the anatomy of the ship book is really good for that, we've managed to get them fitted. So I think that's it for this week. I think we've done enough and we set out more or less what we wanted to do. Next week in part 31 I'll be moving on and starting some of the ship's boats. There are quite a few to build for the middle of the shelter deck, which was sometimes known as the boat deck. And I'm also going to look at starting the main mast. I won't be finishing it next week, but I want to at least start the main mast base on the tripod and have a look at building the main boat derrick, which is attached to the foreside of the main mast. So that'll be coming up again in another 7 days, next Friday night as usual. So I hope you can join me for that. In the meantime, everybody have a good week, stay safe, happy modelling, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Thank you.